Well, I want to wish all of you a Shabbat Shalom. We're delighted that you're joining us this morning, and of course that Dr. David Lair is joining us also. For those of you who may be new to our Shabbat morning study minyan, we don't show the words on the screen. We hope you have a siddur. We're using Mishkan HaTefillah, the prayer book that many of us use in Reformed congregations. If you don't have one in front of you, just listen extra closely. And we often go around taking turns in the English parts. And so I promise that if you are somebody who is just joining us today, I won't ask you to do any reading. But I want to begin this morning with your special prayer for Ukraine, written by one of our previous scholars in residence, Rabbi Rachel Sabbath Beit Halachmi. We come before you, Eternal, praying for peace. A new war has begun and thousands of innocent people are dying. We pray for the strength and courage of the few faced with the ruthless power of the many. We stand together with our brothers and sisters in Ukraine, the birthplace of so many of our ancestors, a place where the Jewish people has known both light and darkness. We pray for a quick end to the raging conflict and the senseless bloodshed. May our people remember that wherever a Jew is in danger or hurt, we all feel that danger and pain as well. As they seek cover from the life-threatening missiles and fire falling from the sky. As they help the elderly and hug their children tightly and defend their homeland. We pray that they can maintain hope that a Sukkot Shalom, a canopy of blessing and peace, will soon emerge above them. May all the innocent people in Ukraine and throughout the region know that we are with them. Even from afar, we hear their cries. May they know that we will continue to advocate for peace among nations, that we will strengthen our commitment to aid and protect every human being. May the source of all life protect all of humanity from violence. May the source of peace bring wisdom to their leaders and bring a sense of tranquility, of shalva to the people of the region, and peace to all who are in danger. As together we all say, Amen. 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 If we continue beginning our service, Matovu, page 192.
Matovu, Matovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael, Matovu, Matovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael, Bani Berach Chasecha, Avo Betecha, Eshacha Velecha Kodecha Ve'iratecha, Matovu, Matovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael, Adonai Ahavti, Me'yom Betecha, U'mekom Mishkan Givodecha, Mishkan Givodecha, V'ani Ashtachaveh, Ve'echra, Erechalim Ze Adonai Osi, Matovu, Matovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael, V'ani Tefilati Lecha, Na'ed Rachon, Elohim B'Rav Chaser, Anelim Emet Yishecha, Matovu, Matovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael, Matovu, Matovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael. Vishkenatecha Yisrael.
Nick, if you would, the bottom of page 194.
Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who formed the human body with skill, creating the body's many pathways and openings. It is well known before your throne of glory that if one of them be wrongly opened or closed, it would be impossible to endure and stand before you. Blessed are you, Adonai, who heals all flesh, working wondrously.
Baruch atah Adonai,
Rofei kol basar umafli la'asot. Elohai, Elohai, deheshama, shenatata bi tehorahi. Elohai, Elohai, deheshama, shenatata bi tehorahi. Ata berata, ata yitzarta, ata nefachta bi. Ve'ata mishamra, mishamra bekirbi. Elohai, Elohai, deheshama, shenatata bi tehorahi.
The Audrey, if you would, the English, the bottom of 197.
My soul came to me pure, drawn from the reservoir of the holy. All the time it remains within me. I'm thankful for its thirst for compassion and justice. Let my eyes behold the beauty of all creatures. Let my hands know the privilege of righteous deeds. Baruch
atah Adonai, asher biyado nefesh kol chai, v'ruach kol basar ish. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan l'sachli bina le'avtim ben yom u'ben layla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivri. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zokeh kifufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, rocha haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechim mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, mamish harumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, הנותן ליין כוח. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, המעביר שינה מעיניי ותלומה מעפעפי. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שעשני בצלם אלוהים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שעשני בן חורים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שעשני ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, עוז ישראל בגבורה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, עוז ישראל בתפארה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו לעשות בדברי תורה. אלו דברים שאין להם שיעור, אלו דברים שאין להם שיעור, אלו דברים שאין להם שיעור, אלו הם כיבוד אב ואם וגמילות חסדים והשכמת בין המדרש שחרית וערבית. אלו דברים שאין להם שיעור, אלו דברים שאין להם שיעור, אלו הם בהכנסת אורחים וביקור חולים, בהכנסת כלה ולוויית המת ועיון תפילה, ועיון תפילה באהבה שיעור אלוהי. ותלמוד תורה כנגד כולם, ותלמוד תורה כנגד כולם, ותלמוד תורה כנגד כולם. ותלמוד תורה כנגד כולם, ותלמוד תורה כנגד כולם, ותלמוד תורה כנגד כולם.
We continue on page 208 with Kaddish Rabbanan. Those of you in mourning or observing yard site, they wish to rise and be unmuted. Together we share these words with you. Remember to unmute.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. V'yamah divrach irutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael. V'agala v'zman kariv v'yamiru. Amen.
Amen.
V'hei shmei v'yolam Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitmar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalah shemei dekudusha v'yichud le'ela yinkol birchata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nekamata da'amiran yamim. Amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Talmidehom v'al kol Talmidehom v'al kol man diastik v'oraita di v'atra hadin v'di v'chol atar v'atar yehei v'chon olchon shlama rabba v'china v'chista v'rachamim v'chayim arichin u'msmona v'richa Ufarkanan min kadam avuhon di bishmayav v'yamiru. Amen.
Amen.
Hey shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yamiru. Amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mroma hu barachamav yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevet v'yamiru. Amen.
Amen. Baruch Shema V'Haya Olam Baruch Hu. As we continue, if you would, Deborah, the bottom of page 212.
Blessed is the one who spoke and the world came to be. Blessed is the one. Blessed is the one who continually authors creation. Blessed is the one whose word is deed. Blessed is the one who decrees and fulfills. Blessed is the one who is compassionate towards the world. Blessed is the one who is compassionate towards all creatures. Blessed is the one who rewards the reverent. Blessed is the one who exists for all time, ever enduring. Blessed is the one who redeems and saves. Blessed is God's name. With song of praise, we extol you and proclaim your sovereignty, for you are the source of life in the universe. One God, life of the universe, praised and glorious ruler, your name is eternal. Blessed are you, Adonai, sovereign, who is glorified through praise.
As we continue praising God, Psalm 150, page 218.
Hallelujah, Bekocho, Hallelujah, Bekiazo, Hallelujah, Begorata, Hallelujah, Kirov Gulo, Hallelujah, Beteka Shofar, Hallelujah, Beteva Vechinor, Hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, betokum machot, hallelujah, b'minim ve'uga, hallelujah, b'tzitzilei shama. Hallelujah, b'tzitzilei truah, כל הנשמה דהללויה, כל הנשמה דהללויה, הללויה, 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 הללויה.
Yishtabach Shimcha La'ad Malkeinu. David, would you be willing the first English paragraph on page 223?
You shall always be praised, great and holy God, our sovereign in heaven and on earth. Songs of praise and songs of adoration become you. Acknowledge you, your might and your dominion. Yours are strength and sovereignty, sanctity, grandeur, and glory always. We offer our devotion, open our hearts, and acclamation.
Baruch atah Adonai, Melech gadol v'tkiv hakol, Melech gadol v'nifol, Abocher v'shemra, Melech echad olam. Praised are you, sovereign of wonders, crowned in adoration, delighting in song, eternal majesty.
יתקדש שמי רבה, ויאמר יברך כריתי וימליק מלכותי, בחיי חוד וימי חוד ובחיי דכו בית ישראל, בגלה בזמן קריב, אמרו אמן, יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם ימי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר, ויתהלל, ויתהלל שמי קדושה, בריחו, לעילה מכל וחדה בשירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, תמירן ביעלמה, ואמרו אמן. יא לה 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 לה, יא לה 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 לה, יא לה לה לה, la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la la, ya la 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 la. Baruchu et Adonai Hamevorach. Baruch Adonai. המבורך לעולם ועד, המבורך, המבורך לעולם ועד.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer or v'rei choshech, osei shalom v'rei et haTov. המאיר לארץ ולהרים עליה ברחמים, וכתובו מחדש בכל יום תמיד מעשה בראשית. מה רבו מעשיך אדוני, אולם בחוכמה עשית, מלאה הארץ בניניך, יתברך אדוני אלוהינו, על שבח מעשה ידיך, גם ולראה אור שעשית יפארו חסדיך. אור חדש על ציון תאיר, אור חדש על ציון תאיר, ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו, מהרה לאורו. ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות. Sue and Alan, would you guys do the first and second paragraphs in English on page 230? Yes. But you've got to unmute, Sue.
How deeply you have loved us, Adonai, our God, gracing us with surpassing compassion on account of our forebears, whose trust led you to teach them the laws of life. Be gracious to us, teaching us as well. O merciful one, may mercy on us be making us able to understand and discern, to heed, learn, and teach, and lovingly to observe, perform, and fulfill all that is your Torah. Enlighten our eyes with your Torah, focus our minds on your mitzvot, unite our hearts in love and reverence for your name. Then we will never feel shame, never deserve rebuke, never stumble. Having trusted in your great and awesome holiness, we shall celebrate your salvation with joy.
Now the cantor will continue in Hebrew.
הביאנו לשלום מרבה כבוד הארץ, ותוליכנו כל מביאות לארצנו, יהיה פועל ישועתך. ובאנו בחרת וקרבתנו לשמך ונפשנו באמת, להודות לך ליחדך באהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני, הבוחר בעמו ישראל, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, שיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם. לשבתך בביתך ולכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך ובשרם לאור ידיך, והיו לטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך.
And Mike, would you read the first English paragraph on page 236?
Sure. Adonai said to Moses as follows: Speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. That shall be your fringe. Look at it and recall all the commandments of Adonai and observe them, so that you do not follow your heart and eyes and your lustful urge.
למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
If you would, Margie, would you do the first paragraph on page 238 and Chuck the second paragraph? You have to unmute, Margie.
For us, this eternal teaching is true and enduring, beloved and precious, awesome, good, and beautiful. The God of the universe is truly our sovereign, the book of Jacob, our protecting shield. God endures through all generations. God's name persists. God's throne is firm. God's sovereignty and faithfulness last forever. God's words live and endure, faithful and precious for eternity.
From Egypt you redeemed us, freeing us from bondage. For that your beloved sang praise, exalting you. Your dear ones offered hymns, songs, praise, blessings, and thanksgiving to you as sovereign, the living and enduring God, high and exalted, great and awesome. God ever humbles the proud, raises the lowly, frees the imprisoned, redeems the afflicted, helps the oppressed, answering our people when we cry out. Praise to God Most High, blessed is God and deserving of blessing. In great joy, Moses, Miriam, and Israel responded with song to you. all of them proclaiming,
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש. דור התהילות אוסף אלה, דור התהילות אוסף אלה. שירה חדשה, שיבחו גאולים לשמך שפת הים, יחד כולם עמדו והמליכו ויאמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם מברך, לעולם מברך. צור ישראל, קומה מעזרת ישראל, עובדך נמך יהודה וישראל. ועלינו אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. אננננננננ אדוני, אנננננננ שפתי תפתח, אנננננננ ופי יגיד, ופי יגיד תהילתך. אנננננננ אדוני, אננננננ שפתי תפתח, אננננננ ופי יגיד, ופי יגיד תהילתך. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואימותינו, אלוהי אברהם, אלוהי יצחק ואלוהי יעקב, אלוהי שרה, אלוהי רבקה, אלוהי רחל ואלוהי לאה, האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומר חסדים טובים וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה, אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיים מתים אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מחכה חיים בחסד, מחיים מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך מביט ומחייך, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן נתן לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים, נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ כבודו. אדיר אדירנו אדוני אדוננו, מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו ומכנו, ומושיענו והוא ישמיענו, ורחמיו לעיני כל אחד. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור. הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, בשבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת לכבוד עונג שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת לכבוד עונג שבת. מקדשי שבי שבת, אולי ישמעו ויתקדמו בתולך שבת, שבת ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת בכל עונג שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת בכל עונג שבת. וחשבי רצית בו בקהילה של שבת, וחשבי רצית בו בקהילה של שבת, שבת ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת בכל עונג שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת בכל עונג שבת. חמדה ימים עוד קראת שבת, זכר למעשה בראשית שבת, שבת ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת בכל עונג שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת בכל עונג שבת.
Margie, if you would, the English on page 252.
My pleasure. Our God and God of our ancestors, be pleased with our rest. Sanctify us with your mitzvot and grant us a share in your Torah. Satisfy us with your goodness and gladden us with your salvation. Purify our hearts to serve you in truth. In your gracious love, Adonai our God, grant us your holy Shabbat as a heritage. May Israel, who sanctifies your name, rest on Shabbat. Blessed are you, Adonai, who sanctifies Shabbat.
And Steve, if you would, the top of page 255.
My Savior Adonai, our
So
God,
Steve, 255. I'm sorry about this.
ever-present one, may we, your people Israel, be worthy of our deeds and our prayers wherever we live, wherever we seek you in this land, in Zion, restored in all lands. You are our God, whom alone we serve in reverence.
Dan, if you and Nadine would start us the first two paragraphs on page 257.
Nadine's not with me this morning, so I will do
So
that.
you'll start with the first paragraph and Eve Joan, the second paragraph, and Gloria, the third paragraph.
And Rabbi, what page?
257, Dan.
Thank you. For the everlasting grandeur of creation, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies, filling us with awe and challenging our imagination. Moduin.
For this fragile planet Earth, its times and tides, its sunsets and seasons. Modim anachnu la.
For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and achievements.
Carol, if you would, then the fourth paragraph, and Jean, the fifth paragraph.
1, 2, 3. For human community, our common past and future hope, our oneness transcending all separation, our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility and oppression. Modin Anak.
For high hopes and noble causes, for faith without fanaticism, for understanding of views not shared. Modin Anak.
Sherry, if you would, the next two paragraphs, please.
For all who have labored and suffered for a fairer world, who have lived so that others might live in dignity and freedom. For human liberties and sacred rights, for opportunities to change and grow, to affirm and choose. Modim.
We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes, not by our words, but by our deeds. Blessed are you, Eternal One. Your name is goodness, and you are worthy of thanksgiving. Baruch atah Adonai, aton shivcha l'chana el l'hodot.
Sim, 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 shalom. Sim, shalom, tova ubracha. Sim, 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 shalom. Tova ubracha. Shen b'chesed v'rachamim aleinu v'yachol Yisrael amecha. V'rafenu yotzreinu k'olanu ke'echad be'or panecha. Sim, 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 shalom. Sim, shalom, tova ubracha. Sim, 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 shalom. Tova ubracha. Give your panecha natata lanu Adonai Eloheinu. Torah chaim be'ahava chesed tzedakah u'veracha v'rachamim b'chaim b'shalom. Sim, 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 shalom. Sim, shalom, tova u'bracha. Sim, sim, shalom, tova u'bracha. Tov enecha levarech et amecha Yisrael b'chol עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. שים, שים, שים שלום, שים שלום דבר וברכה. שים, שים, שים שלום, טובה וברכה. ברוך אתה אדוני, המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום.
One of my predecessors here at Emmanuel B'nai Shuren, Rabbi Chaim Stern, wrote these words of prayer which are in Mishkad HaNefesh. When evil darkens our world, let us be bearers of light. When fists are clenched in self-righteous rage, let our hands be open for the sake of peace. When injustice slams doors on the ill, the poor, the old, and the stranger, let us pry those doors open. Where shelter is lacking, let us be builders. Where food and clothing are needed, let us be providers. Where knowledge is denied, let us be champions of learning. Where dissent is stifled, let our voices speak truth to power. When the earth and its creatures are threatened, let us be their guardians. When bias, greed, and bigotry erode our country's values, let us proclaim liberty throughout the land. In places where no one acts like a human being, let us bring courage. Let us bring compassion. Let us bring humanity. As we all say, Amen. And as we continue in silent prayer with the traditional words you can find on page 260, other words on page 261, or whatever other words may be on your hearts.
Ose shalom bimromav yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Ose shalom bimromav yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Ose shalom bimromav yaseh shalom aleinu Shalom aleinu ve'akol Yisrael ve'imru amen.
As we continue on page 371. Yishberak Avotenu v'imotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Zarech Rachel v'Leah. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Blessed heal those of our friends who are ill.
Ron Levin, Ellen Levin, Kathy Liddell, and the wounded in Ukraine.
Louise Kaufman, Gail Sussmer Peterson, Beth Others Harris, Lori Lincoln.
For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, if you raise your hands virtually and visually, when I call you to unmute, Dan.
Pam Zuckerman.
And Carol, we're wondering about your daughter. We've missed you.
Thank you. She is very slowly coming around. Her surgery was very long and it's going to be a long haul healing, but she's coming there slowly. Thank you. So I do a Misha Barak for her.
For Ilana, yes.
Ilana.
Sue.
B. Marks and Shirley Lerner.
Alan.
Lisa Turner.
Rocio.
Debbie Reynolds, Joel Berwick, Mary Ann Cantor.
Margie.
My husband, Marty Stein.
Because we are praying on their behalf. May the Blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for their health to be restored, their strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of spirit and of body. May God send wisdom and insight to those who bring healing. May God send courage and compassion to those whose struggles continue. And may the time come now very soon when we can all breathe freely without fear. As together we all say,
Amen. Yishbera avotenu mikor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing and let us say, Amen. Mishebera imotenu bekor habracha yavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of spirit, the renewal of body, and let us say, Amen.
as we rise or we are able, Aleinu, page 586.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו גילויי הרצון, ולא שמענו כמשפחות האדמה, ולא שם חלקנו כהם, וגר עלינו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. שכונות השמיים ויוסר הארץ, ומה שמגרו בשמיים נפעל, ושכינתו זו, בגובה מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אלוהינו, אמת מלכנו ובזולתו, כך כתוב בתורתו, וידעת יום בחשבות כאלה לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ועל הארץ מתחת אל הוד.
We therefore hope in you, eternal our God, and we soon behold the glory of your might, sweeping away the false gods of the earth, that idolatry be utterly destroyed, affecting the world under the rule of God, that all humanity invoke your name, turning all the wicked of the earth towards you. But all who dwell on earth acknowledge that unto you every knee must bend and every tongue swear loyalty. Before you, eternal our God, let them pay homage. Let them give glory to your honored name. Let all accept the yoke of your reign, that you may rule over us soon and forever. For sovereignty is yours, and to all eternity you will reign in glory, as it is written in your Torah. The eternal will reign forever and ever.
ונאמר ויען אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
On page 599. We think of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have drawn into our hearts with our own. As those of you in mourning or observing Yortzeit may wish to rise and mention the name or names of your dear ones. June Meyer, and then those of you on Zoom, if you'll raise your hands virtually or visually, call on you and rise and stay unmuted. Sherry David Blumberg, yeah. Jean.
Lucille Bowman.
Rini.
Narbada Shah.
Dan.
Susie Fono.
Sue.
Marty Carniel.
Alan.
Jack Turner, Helga Lovings, Sarah Feiss, grandfather Benjamin Barkus, and great-great-grandfather Aaron Yudkowsky.
Zichronam livracha. May their memories always be a blessing. As we turn to the words of Kaddish on the previous page, Yit Gadal Yitadash Shmei Rabbah.
Amen.
Yalmad Yirach Yamlich Malkute B'chayechon V'yom Chol Beit Yisrael Ba'ala Bizman Karim Imru
Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah V'Barach Le'olam V'Yamaya.
Yitbarach V'Yishtabach V'Yitpa'ar V'Yitroman V'Yitnaseh V'Yithadar V'Yit'areh V'Yithalal Shemei Dikdusha B'Richu Le'ila Min Kol Yerkelata V'Shivata Tushbechata V'Nechemata Da'amiran V'Yama V'Yibru Amen. Yehei Lama Rabba Min Shemaya V'Chayim Aleinu V'Yal Kol Yisrael V'Yimru Amen.
Osei
Shalom
Shalom
Imrama.
Yaseh Shalom
Shalom. Aleinu
Aleinu V'Al
Kol
Yisrael
Israel. Imru. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
May the one who makes peace in the high heavens above send peace down here to us, to all Israel and to all the world. As together we all say,
Amen. We'll conclude our service on page 647 with Oziv Zimratia. Oziv Zimratia, Vayagili Yeshua. 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 Oziv Zimratia, Vayagili Yeshua.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbos to you all, wherever you may be. At least we're together here in time, the Shabbat morning. So we're continuing. We're not going to be leaving you, those of you who are with us on those other platforms like our stream or Facebook Live or YouTube. What we do now is we're going to gather kind of for Kiddush. And so our cantor is going to kind of maybe give us a little musical interlude while we give all of you a chance to find your Kiddush cups and fill it with whatever fruit of the vine you may be filling it with. And then together we will come back and do Kiddush, and then we will segue into our study.
Ya Allah, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la ya la la la, ya Allah, ya la la la, ya la 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 la, la la la. Now we'll continue with Kiddush, so please join in. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledor v'merit olam. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledor v'merit olam. Ben Yemen Bnei Yisrael, Oti Le'olam, Oti Le'olam, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות ברית עולם.
Al Kain Be'erach Adonai, es Yom HaShabbat Vayakadashehu Sabrit.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei berith
You're going to be able to go with, can't teach in New York. I am, I'm assuming.
Shabbat shalom, y'all.
Shabbat shalom.
We will be momentarily gathering here. He doesn't know I'm going to do this to him yet, but our president is with us this morning. Mr. Brinker, would you, before we move on to our study and to our learning, with the honor of having Dr. David Lear with us, do you have any announcements you'd like to make?
I just want to make sure everybody knows about the schedule for the rest of the weekend.
You got to talk a little louder, Mike, so the owl will pick you up, okay?
I just want to make sure everybody has understands the schedule for the rest of the weekend. We'll be getting together 6:30 Sunday evening. That's in person here, right?
Or
online, or online for presentation from Dr. Laird, Nature Knows No Borders, Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, and international students learning together. So don't miss that. And also tomorrow at 3:30, got it right here, is a Salute to Jewish Educators. That's a community event. It's at 3:30 p.m. at the JCC. It's a hybrid event, so it's online as well. And among others, Anastasia Esther and Bob Grasner and George Schneiman will all be honored, so don't miss that. And also coming up is next week, Wednesday, March 9th, Journey to 50, an honoring 50th anniversary of women in the rabbinate. Rabbi Borowski will be involved in that. And also in 2 weeks, we'll be beginning celebration of Purim. So please check your Emmanuel email and website for all the details. Thank you.
So, thank you, Mike. So we have been studying Mishle, we've been studying Proverbs. And when we have a guest with us like this, the challenge is to take our text and use the text then as a springboard to our speaker. So rather than, as we've been doing and will continue next week in the 24th chapter of Mishle, where we've asked people to kind of if they will, pick their favorite verse or verses, talk about them, and then we examine them more fully. I took a look again at the 24th chapter. We're in the midst of these sayings of the sages. There are some 30 of them, depending on how you count, beginning at the middle of chapter 22, where it's very close to those of Egyptian wisdom literature. And I'm looking now in 24, it continues past those. And I decided to take a look at verses 10, 11, and 12 of chapter 24. So those of you with texts can take a look at those verses. And it can be read a couple of different ways. Verse 10 could be seen as separate from 11 and 12, kind of an indication that negligence ultimately leads to weakness. And then verses 11 and 12, where there is this requirement to rescue those who are in danger. Or the three of them can kind of be seen, if you will, as a package, the three of them together. In a second, I'll continue. We're making a couple of technological changes here. To see if that helps with some of the sound. Somehow, has my mic been changed? Can you all still hear me? Can you just shake your heads? Yeah, okay. So we have some different translations as I looked at the Hebrew of these three verses and then the English texts. So I'm going to stick kind of with the JPS, the new JPS translation. We have additional technological changes here. As we thank Andrew for making these. So Nikki, if you would, but in a loud voice so we can pick you up, just read the English, 10, 11, and 12.
If you showed yourself slack in time of trouble, wanting in power, if you refrained from rescuing those condemned to slaughter. If you say, we knew nothing of it, surely he who fathoms hearts will discern the truth. He who watches over your life will know it, and he will pay each man as he deserves.
Thanks, Nikki. So I'm going to do this quickly because today you didn't come to hear me or to hear each other. We came to learn with Dr. Laird. But if you will, the indication in verse 10 is if you are in some way lax in a difficult time, okay? Biyom tzara. Then somehow, if you fail to exercise your power, you will be weakened. One contemporary scholar suggests a better translation might be, if you are lax in a day of good fortune, the day of trouble, in the day of trouble, your strength will be constrained. And I do believe that that connects then with the other verses. That if you do not refrain from committing wrong, in other words, you actually have to intervene to prevent wrong. You can't just refrain from committing acts of evil. You have to act when you see it, because if you fail to do so, pretending some kind of ignorance, God will know what you were thinking, and eventually punishment will come. Now, there are all kinds of discussions we can have on this that will expand in the weeks to come. But we cannot act that we didn't know certain things, be they things like climate change or global warming. And the longer then we wait, the harder it's going to be to do the work that we have to do. In a sense, it reminds me of Rabbi Tarfon, of course, in Pirkei Avot. It's not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect it. And so we are able to have with us this morning Dr. David Laird, who is the former executive director of the Arava Institute and now is Director of International Development. Is that the proper title, David?
Yeah.
David is a native of North Carolina, though you can't hear it in his accent. He made Aliyah in 1978. He had gotten his degree in Master in Management Science from a combination from BU, from Boston University, and Ben-Gurion University, and his doctorate from Ben-Gurion's Department of Geography and Environmental Development. We are lucky to have him because this year he is on sabbatical at BU's Elie Wiesel Center for Jewish Studies, where he has been teaching during the course of the year, even though apparently getting here from Boston took him just almost as much time as it would have been flying from Ben-Gurion to Chicago. But we are absolutely thrilled he is here. The weekend was made possible through the hard work and dedication of our cantor, who's going to encourage many of you, if you haven't already committed to going on the Aravaz bike ride from Jerusalem down into Eilat. And without the sponsorship of Women of Emmanuel and the Israel Center and the JCRC of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. So we're delighted to welcome Dr. Leonard with us, David with us. It's going to take us a couple of minutes to make, oh, no minutes? Oh, so we're going to make an instant transition here. So you no longer have to look at me, but we get to look at Dr. David Lair. So David, Baruch haba.
Well, thank you, Rabbi, and thank you.
No audio.
All right, hang on just a sec. We're going to try to make it louder. If not, we'll do a switch of computers here to make it a little better.
Just move this a little bit closer.
It was interesting.
So we're going to try this again, and I'll just look at your faces to see if you're hearing. Just nod.
One second. No, it's not going to work. Ah. No, that's. You can't hear us at this time?
Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. Thumbs up if you're here. I'm getting a nod. Thumbs up. Nods. Thumbs up. I think you're here. Okay. All right. Great. So again, thank you all for joining. Last night, I spoke a bit about some of the environmental challenges that face the world and some of the environmental challenges that face Israel and the Middle East. And my contention, my hypothesis is that we really cannot face these environmental challenges without doing so together with our neighbors. And this is really what the Arava Institute, still seeing audio is faint. Audio is not great, right?
That's what I just saw too. All right, so lost sound, audio is faint. I hope you can still hear me. We're going to work on it. One more moment, please. And so the question is, how many Jews does it take? This is not my area of expertise.
Rabbi, we hear you.
I know, and we may make a quick change of computers, okay? I am significantly less, I understand that.
a softer voice. That's all that is. It's fine. Okay.
Oh, don't leave us. All right. We're working on this, folks. I wonder, David, if we put my sound with your video, if that would affect it in some way. It's supposedly going through there, so I don't know what. Right. All right, nothing is taking place yet, folks. Just hang on. You get to look at David's plenum, but in the meantime, we're working on sound. Nothing is being discussed. You're not missing anything. And so now it looks like we're trying a different mic, maybe. So you'll be able to see some of the action here at home as we're dealing with the technical difficulties. So hopefully by adding this microphone, you'll all be able to hear.
Hear me now? You get a thumbs up from the people in the back. That is something here. Here. Fine. Back again. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go with that. Hear me now? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sounds sort of muddy from over here.
Okay, working on it still.
And there's an echo in it.
And there's an echo. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Everybody hear me?
Yes. People
Yes,
can
I
also
hear.
put up their own sound. Sometimes we have to increase our sound to hear your sound.
I had mine all the way to the top already. So
Yeah, some people said they're already up. Should we go ahead? Let's see. Okay. What about if I'll just speak loud? Maybe that will work. Yeah.
So
I'm going to try and speak a little louder, and you tell me if you hear me now. I'll speak to the Torah. Great. So as I said last night, the environmental issues that we face in the region, in the world, can only be addressed, mitigated, and adapted to if we take an approach that we are all in this together. And we've just gone through 2 years, right, where we all got it, right? We understand that defeating the pandemic in the United States means nothing if Africa or Asia or some other part of the world continues to suffer and continues to be a source of new variants. This really shows us, I think, that we are in a global world. And even in the Middle East, even with all of our conflicts and disagreements over politics and borders, we do need to understand that our natural resources are, in fact, joint natural resources. They belong to everybody in the region. So if we look at this sort of, there's a feedback loop. going on in the world, and that is that war and conflict, as we see now in the Ukraine, is the violence of war destroys ecosystems, destroys natural resources. Okay, we had a very big scare a few days ago when the nuclear plant was attacked, and we know what that could do, and what that did in Chernobyl to an entire area. Now, the destruction of those ecosystems means that natural resources soon become more scarce than they are now. And when natural resources become scarce, this can be a catalyst for war and conflict. And war and conflict can destroy ecosystems, making natural resources scarce, making war and conflict more likely. This feedback loop is only amplified by many things that are happening. Number one, simply population growth, okay? The exponential increase in the number of people on this planet is putting pressure on our natural resources, creating reasons for conflict, which then hits the ecosystems. Climate change, okay? Climate change itself, which is in some ways a result of this enormous increase in the human population, combined with our own technology, and is creating this change in our climate. And this change in our climate has a devastating impact on ecosystems all around the world. And we add to that the fact that people are simply consuming more, that countries in the past where the standard of living was low have now raised their standard of living. And now their standard of living is more and more like the standard of living of highly consuming societies like Europe and the United States. So all those things together simply create a amplification of this feedback loop. So how do we get out of this? How do we get away from this cycle of violence, destruction, and scarcity, leading to violence, destruction, and scarcity? We have to do something different. We have to think differently about security, about safety, about food security, about water security, about energy security. We have to recognize that those basic needs, right, are part of our security in the region. When infrastructure is not improved, when infrastructure is not developed and created that in a way that meets the needs of people, such as what is happening in Gaza, what we have is a collapse. We have a collapse of infrastructure. Gaza today, our neighbor, okay, a place that is literally 200 miles from my home, but much closer to many of my friends who live in the Gaza envelope, who live in Sderot, who live in Shara Negev Regional Council. They're right next door. As my good friend Ophir Levenstein, the head of the Regional Council in Shara Negev, says, our area is never going to develop unless our neighbors are developing. If our neighbors continue to live with a lack of electricity, and Gazans get between 3 and 4 hours of electricity a day, and imagine living a life in which you only had electricity 3 or 4 hours a day, and it would come on at various times. For instance, 2 in the morning. So then you have to get up at 2 in the morning to do your laundry. So that's when you have electricity. Water in Gaza is not only scarce, but what there is degraded. Okay, Gaza sits on top of the coastal aquifer, which is a shared aquifer between Israel and Gaza. And both Israel and Gazans are overpumping this aquifer. Because it's the coastal aquifer, it's, an aquifer is like a lake, an underground lake, right, which you can access to get water. But as
overpumping occurs, the water table drops. And when the water table drops, it drops below sea level. And since it's right next to the coast, seawater is now seeping into that aquifer, right? Highly saline. On top of that, because of the lack of electricity, there's not enough electricity to run the wastewater treatment plants. Because there's not enough electricity to run the wastewater treatment plants, we have what you see here on this picture of overflowing wastewater into the streets of Gaza and then into the aquifer or into the ocean, which pollutes the both the aquifer, which is shared between Israel and Gaza, and the Mediterranean Sea, where wastewater washes up on their beaches, wastewater washes up on our beaches. Last year, the Ashkelon desalination plant had to be shut down twice because of the wastewater that had gotten into the system. So this situation is not a situation that Israel can, building a wall doesn't help. Okay? Building a wall doesn't solve the problem. In fact, I would contend that it's actually taking down the wall that will solve the problem. Taking down the wall and creating long-term cooperation that, one, addresses those immediate problems. I mean, the basic things like making sure that Palestinians in Gaza have electricity 24/7, making sure that when they go to their faucet and turn on the water, something comes out, and what comes out is drinkable. These are basic issues, basic problems to be solved. Without water, they can't grow food. Without food, they have no food security. Okay, so as the mayor of the regional council that's right next to Gaza says, we must find a way, even at the same time that we have to defend ourselves and we have to be clear about our own security. At the same time, we're here and they're there and no one's going anywhere. And the only way our community can develop is if their community develops. And this is why the Arava Institute, which is dedicated to advancing cross-border environmental cooperation, decided to focus specifically on Gaza, perhaps one of the most difficult cross-border conflicts in the world, to prove a point, to prove that it can be done, to prove that there are people on both sides of this border who believe in peace and who believe that all anybody wants in our region is to have our children grow up safe and healthy. A good friend of mine, a colleague named Tahani Abudaka, the Palestinian from Gaza, former minister for sports and culture. She grew up in Gaza. She was an activist, a social activist in the community. She was one of the leaders of the first Intifada. She was arrested by the Israeli army. She was put in jail. She was pregnant at the time. Spent 4 months in jail, and while she was in jail, she lost her baby. When she came out of that experience, she said to herself, I know that all Palestinian mothers and all Israeli mothers only want one thing for their children, that they grow up healthy and safe and prosperous. And from that moment, when she was released from prison, Tahani became dedicated to working cross-border with her Israeli neighbors, with the enemy, in order to try and build bridges of trust. And so a number of years ago, the Arava Institute, which had dedicated itself to working towards cross-border environmental cooperation in the face of political conflict, through our academic program, by bringing Palestinians, Jordanians, Israelis, and international students together at Kibbutz Torah, at the Arava Institute, to learn together how to work on environmental issues, to do research together with research colleagues from Palestine, from Jordan, and from around the world, to work to build an alumni network. We have over 1,500 alumni throughout the world. About 2/3 of them are in the Middle East, and they continue to work together as well. But we asked ourselves, how can we have a bigger impact? We are here, this little academic institute in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere on Kibbutz Torah. Some of you are going to visit us this year. How can we have a larger impact? And what we decided was that we would try to promote environmental agreements between Jordan, Israel, and Palestine to improve lives, protect the environment, and support sustainable resolution of the conflict. We wanted to take those lessons that we had learned from working with students cross-border and working with researchers cross-border and take them out of the classroom, take them out of the ivory tower, and try and actually implement on the ground actual projects that would make a difference. So in 2016, we convened the first Track 2 environmental forum. Track 2 refers to a sort of diplomatic term. In diplomatic terms, Track 1 means negotiations between governments, and Track 2 is usually a parallel process that takes place between non-governmental organizations who work together while the governments are working out the big issues. The non-governmental organizations are working on, solving problems and building trust. And so we convened this conference in 2016, not because there was a Track 1 process, not because governments were talking to each other, but because they weren't talking to each other. And we said, well, we're going to start a Track 2 process. We're going to start non-governmental organizations talking to each other. And maybe the governmental organizations will get an idea that maybe they should also start talking to each other. And I have to say that after 5 years, and with the current new government, things are starting actually to move. We've had for the first time in I think 15 years, actual meetings between ministers of the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government. We've had ongoing discussions, especially about environment and climate change and public health. So the Arvai Institute back in 2016 said, we're gonna start promoting this idea of using the environment as the bridge to bring people together, because you can argue about everything else, but the environment, there's really no argument. And so we brought together Palestinians, Israelis, Jordanians at Kibbutz Torah in 2016 to begin to talk about water, energy, climate change. Our first thought was, well, we'll be working on projects that we'd already started in Jordan and in the West Bank around water, around energy, around food security. But then came our partner, Tahani Abu Daka, who was living in Ramallah because she had been a minister in the PA government, but was originally from Gaza. But because she was in Ramallah and her whole family was in Gaza, but she had been prevented for 6 years from going back to Gaza in order to visit her family. And so we, the Arvai Institute, applied for a permit for Tahani to go back to Gaza and to see her family. But when she got, and she got it, when she got there, everybody jumped on her and said, Tahani, we need this, we need that, we need water, we need energy, help us. And she came back to us and said, listen, guys, things are bad in the West Bank, but things are really a nightmare in Gaza. There's a humanitarian crisis. And so we began this partnership with our Palestinian friends from an organization called Damor for Community Development. And the principles of our Track 2 ask ourselves, wait a minute, how in the world is an Israeli organization working in Gaza? How's that even feasible? So in all honesty, of course, we don't go into Gaza. We can't at this point. We go into the West Bank, we go to Ramallah, we go to Al-Sira, we go to Hebron, we go to places in the West Bank, we go to Jordan, of course. But in truth, Gaza is still too dangerous for an Israeli to go into. So we work through our colleagues in Damor. They are our partners in the Track 2 process. This is Tahani on the left. And it's all based on the scarcest resource in the Middle East, which is not water, not energy, it's trust. We don't trust each other. And the first step in any kind of partnership is building trust, is really being able to trust each other. And then the second principle that we worked on is that we work directly with community leaders, okay, with municipalities, right? We're not working with Hamas. We're working somewhat with the PA in the West Bank, but in Gaza, our communication, including Zoom calls and meetings in Jordan, is directly with our Gazan colleagues who are community leaders, heads of municipalities. And we're working on the most basic infrastructure issue: water, energy, food security, and waste management. Here on the right, this picture is a picture of the minister from the Palestinian Authority for local governments who came to the inauguration of one of our projects that in a minute I'm going to explain. But in that inauguration, which took place and was live streamed on Zoom, thanked the RFI Institute for the work that we were doing in Gaza. So what are our projects? Our projects, what is the difference? You know, when we met back in 2016, we met with our Palestinian colleagues, with our Jordanian colleagues, and the message was very clear. They said, this is great, wonderful to get together, but if this is going to be just another mifgash hummus, a hummus meeting, you know, you bring a bunch of Jews and Arabs together, you know, in Spain or in Maine or somewhere, and we get together and we eat some hummus. Wow, we had a meeting, and I met a Muslim, and I met an Arab, and I met a Jew, and then we go home. Wow, we made peace. People are tired of that, especially the Palestinians. They want to see something. You know, for them, another meeting with another group of Israelis, they can do that anytime. What they want to see is something different, and that's what we presented. We presented this idea that we were not just going to meet and talk. We're actually going to do something on the ground, a bottom-up, high-impact approach, as opposed to what many of the international organizations continue to try and push, which is mega projects like, you know, wastewater treatment plants that will take care of the whole city of Gaza, which is very much needed and very important. But in the meanwhile, the one that they built that took them 10 years to build, which was the emergency treatment plant, it's called, took 10 years to build, it's now not working because there's not enough fuel to run it. So we come and say, look, we have a different way. Well, first of all, we're not a big international organization. We don't have those kind of resources. But we think we can solve problems incrementally. And the way we do it is we create small projects. Many of them are what we call off-grid or decentralized, not connected to a central system, so they're more resilient. The initial investment is small, okay? And there's less government bureaucracy from both sides or from all sides. So you can get these projects done with a minimum of bureaucracy, but you do need some. You do need some government officials to help you. In a minute, I'll talk about that. The other important thing is that, remember those municipalities that we're directly in touch with, the managing of these projects is in their hands, right? It's not in the hands of Hamas or the PA, you know, who may be or maybe not corrupt. It's not in the hands of the Israelis, the Israeli government. This is in the hands of those people we're working with directly. They manage it, they own it, and therefore less prone to government corruption, and it provides agency, which is critical for the Palestinian people. If they don't stop acting as the victims and start to become the agents of their own destiny, of their own future, nothing will ever change. These are modular in design. So the projects that we do maybe only solve a small problem, but if they work, then they are scalable, they are replicable. So we can, you know, add it. If one works, we can add another one and another one and another until we start to have a critical impact. And their operations are sustained, right? They don't become white elephants because we work with the municipalities to provide training and management of these long-term projects. And because the municipalities own them, they also have a bigger interest in seeing them continue to work because they are under public pressure to deliver, like any municipality. They need, if their community doesn't have water, they won't stay in power very long. If they don't have appropriate wastewater treatment in their community, they won't stay in power very long. So they have a vested interest in seeing these projects work. As I said, we keep the state, the government's bureaucracy out, but there still is a level of government officials that need to be involved, right? For instance, very simply, in order to get anything into Gaza, any piece of equipment, any solution, you need the Israeli army to approve. And in fact, we have a very good relationship with the Israeli army, who have told us that what we're doing is critical and that anything they can do, they will help. And they have done a phenomenal job of helping us to make these things happen. But we're not, especially prior government, we're not going to the ministers and asking them for help, because that would be a surefire way to put a bullet in our shoes, our foot. We do enlist the international support through embassies and diplomats. And we have developed a multinational network of scientists who support. In other words, where does this technology come from? Where do the ideas of how to solve these problems come from? And through that, we are now proposing larger scale projects. Now that we've proven what we can do on the ground, we're now discussing also with government officials, how do we expand what we've done? How do we scale up? So taking a look at Gaza, one of the the most basic problem is drinking water. Drinking water in Gaza is unfit for human consumption, according to the UN, according to WHO. Almost 196, 98% cannot be drunk. Is not healthy to drink. How do Gazans get drinking water? Companies pump that water up, that undrinkable water, treat it, put it in trucks, tankers, and send it all over Gaza. That's where people get their water. They go, the tanker comes, fills up storage tanks of people's houses, in institutions. People buy it directly. Obviously, there's also just a lot of bottled water that's drunk. But first of all, that water in the tankers, not a whole lot better than the water that's coming out of the ground. Okay, it's the treatment there is not great, and the tankers themselves are not particularly clean. So in fact, they're not really getting that much better. A couple of years ago, an Israeli company called WaterJet created a atmospheric water generator, which is a unit, a machine that takes water out of the atmosphere, out of the humidity in the atmosphere, turns it into drinking water. Okay. Companies doing work all over the world, especially in communities like Africa and South America that are lacking clean drinking water. Drinking water scarcity is a problem worldwide. So they've created this unit, this machine that can be run on solar panels, so it can be off-grid. And they had been trying for a number of years to get the unit into Gaza, to test it in Gaza, because they wanted to prove that it could work, anywhere, and knowing the situation. So they turned to us and they said, "Can you help?" Because they hadn't succeeded. They had not succeeded in getting a machine in. And in 2019, we were able to get the first unit in to Abasan al-Kabira. These are the picture on the top is the unit in Abasan al-Kabira, which is a small rural community on the border with Israel in sort of central Gaza. And a year later, we were able to get the second machine into Khan Yunis hospital. The first one was 900 liters a day. and which is about, maybe enough for 100 people, 200 people a day. And we got the second unit in 5,000 liters a day into Gaza. What was really interesting about this situation was that the smaller unit, which ran on solar panels, was running very well for a year, and lots of people were using it to get their water. The one in Khan Yunis was much bigger and used a lot more electricity. So, and electricity is very expensive and unreliable. So the hospital, which had to pay for the electricity, wasn't willing to run it 24/7. They were only willing to run it when the sun was out, and so it wasn't being used at full capacity. Then the May war came, May 21, war between Gaza and Israel. And those tanker trucks, which were transporting water, couldn't run. They couldn't move on the roads because the roads were being bombed. So no drinking water was available. But people in Khan Yunis knew about this machine, and they started lining up to get drinking water. And the hospital, seeing the demand, started to run it 24/7 because they wanted to supply people with water. And when the war was over, they continued to run it because there was a demand, because the water was of such high quality and available that that there was just more and more people wanted it, so they continued to run it. But not only that, 5 other municipalities who had also suffered during the war from the lack of drinking water turned to our Palestinian partners and said, "Hey, we heard about what's going on in Khan Yunis. We want one too." And this month, we're now sending in 5 more units into Gaza. Another major issue, as I mentioned, is wastewater treatment. Okay? About 25% of Gaza's population has no centralized wastewater treatment. But the truth is that even the 75%, the wastewater treatment systems aren't working because it requires electricity, or gas, some type of fuel, which is scarce or limited or not working. And so lots of wastewater is being dumped into the aquifer, literally running in the streets, flowing into the Mediterranean Sea. And so we again partnered with our Palestinian partners in Gaza and said, all right, let's find a solution. And the municipality actually came to us and said, we need a solution. Why? As I said, they are open to public criticism, and they are getting a lot of pressure from their citizens who are saying, we don't want to see. Right now, the way it works is wastewater runs out of people's houses in ditches, small ditches, into a cesspit, into a hole in the ground where it fills up, and then once a month a truck pumps out the cesspit and takes it somewheres to dump it. You don't want to know where. And when it rains, or when the truck is late, of course, those cesspits overflow and it goes into the streets, and it's just a nightmare. So as you can imagine, the mayor of Abasan is very interested in finding a solution. And so we began to work on this, a system that would be incremental, right? That would be mobile. So we did a search for different technologies. We found actually a Palestinian company that had a factory in Turkey, and we ordered a wastewater treatment system. You see a picture, that's the picture of it. It looks a little bit like a shipping container. And we sent it, we ordered it, we bought it, we raised money for it, of course, and bought it and shipped it from Turkey to Israel. When it got to Israel, the Palestinian company that we're working with put it on an Israeli company, a trucking company, took that unit and put it inside a container. It had to go into a special container that could be opened from the top. You know those shipping containers that sit on the back of the truck? So from the roof, there was no roof on this container. It went in like that. And we sent it to Gaza. Had to send it 3 times to the border, because every time the border, the Israeli army, who knew it was coming, and I was working with them, but they actually didn't know how to do this because it had never been done before. No machine like this had ever gone into Gaza. Finally, the third time, we got it right. And the way they do it at the Gaza border for getting anything in is anything that goes into Gaza has to be inspected. It has to be inspected to make sure that it's not going to be used for military purposes. So whatever it is has to be taken out of the container, put on the ground, soldiers inspect it, and then it gets put in a truck that comes from Gaza, right? So the Israeli truck obviously doesn't go in Gaza. But when this container in a container came to the Gaza border, they took the whole container off the truck, put it on the ground, inspected it. Then they put the container back onto another truck that came from Gaza, and it went into Gaza. Then I got a call from the Palestinian company, said, "Where's my container?" "What do you mean? Your container went into Gaza?" I said, "What? I need to get that back to the shipper." So it ended up that we now have, the Arvai Institute now owns a container in Gaza. If anybody needs a container in Gaza, just let me know. You have one, just for you to know. But this container, this unit, this wastewater treatment system, which treats 100 cubic meters of wastewater a day and treats it to the level that it can be used for agricultural water, and was sent to Gaza and had to be put on a big cement foundation. The municipality took on the responsibility for building this cement foundation for it, and this was May 2021. And then the war came. And of course, all work stopped, and the machine was sitting there. We were, of course, worried that something might happen to it, but nothing happened to it. The day after the ceasefire, the municipality went back to work. They wanted this wastewater. They put it together. It's now operational, and it's now running, and it takes care of about 1,000 people, or 100, let's say, somewhere around 100 households, 100 to 200 households, a neighborhood. So if it takes care of 1,000 people, the community of Abba San is 26,000 people. So basically what we need to do is we need to get 25 more in there, and we've actually solved the problem of wastewater for our community. But not just that, we've not only solved the wastewater problem, but we've provided them with a resource that is sorely lacking, which is water for agriculture. This is a rural community, and the wastewater treatment, here it is going into Gaza. There you see on the right their building, and there's on the right is the cement foundation where it's being placed. This was all all these pictures came around the week after the ceasefire. Okay, the week after the ceasefire is when you see all these pictures. And so this is a example, I think, of what cooperation looks like on the ground. This is real cooperation. This is not a mifkash hummus. It's not sitting around and eating hummus together. This is getting something done. And when you do things like this, when you get things done and you make a difference, this creates something that, as I said, is the scarcest resource in the Middle East, which is trust. People begin to trust each other. Another major problem, of course, is energy, as I mentioned. There's basically a 200 megawatt, there's basically a need for 400 megawatts of electricity in Gaza. Gaza of about 2 million people needs about 400 megawatts. There are now currently going into Gaza about 200 megawatts. Most of it is from Israel, a little bit from, I think, Egypt maybe stopped, and there's a tiny amount that is produced inside of Gaza. But most of it is coming from Israel. And so a bigger project that we're working on, but still in a sense small scale, is a 5 megawatt solar field. In the area in the central Gaza, we've found land, and we've found land to rent, our Palestinian partners, and we are now working on developing a 5 megawatt solar field. We estimate that in terms of land space, there's probably enough room for 40 megawatts. So Doesn't solve the whole 200 megawatt deficit, but it puts a nice bite into that. This is actually an agreement that was signed between our Palestinian partner and the Palestinian Energy Authority that guarantees the price of electricity for this solar field. So we already have what's called PPP, PPA, price purchase agreement, which is the sort of basis for any solar field. Now, because there is such a big problem with electricity, because there's such a big problem, there's another problem, another environmental problem that's been created by the lack of electricity. And that is that Palestinians in Gaza, because they can't rely on electricity from the grid, are now relying on solar energy, which is great, right? We want to see more people using solar energy. It makes them more resilient, right? They're not dependent on networks. They can provide their own energy. Problem is that when do you need electricity most? At night. You need it for heat, you need it for light. And so they need batteries for these solar panels. Otherwise, they're kind of useless. They've been purchasing batteries, but what do they purchase? They purchase basically like car batteries, acid lead batteries, the cheapest you can find because they don't have a lot of money. And those batteries last 2 to 3 years, and then they get thrown out. But Gaza has no industrial waste site, has no hazardous waste site. So those batteries, as you can imagine, they either get thrown into the ocean or thrown into garbage dumps, or there are now all these pirate workshops with little kids, 9 and 10 years old, who are working, taking apart acid lead batteries and recycling the material. And so we've been working with the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. Even though Hamas runs Gaza, different parts of the government from the Palestinian Authority are still in charge of things like water, energy, and waste treatment. So we're working with the Palestinian Authority, we're working with the Israeli Ministry of Environment, and with the Israeli Army, and with some private companies in order to get the batteries out of Gaza and into Israel's waste dump. It's toxic waste site near Beersheba. And we've gotten, the Army has given approval, Palestinian Authority has given approval, and now we're sort of deep in negotiations to do this this would be a pretty major project. But again, the reason we're able to do this now is because we did those things before, because we got that water gen in, because we got the wastewater. It's all about having a track record and showing that you really stand by your word, that you're not just talking. Too many organizations have been too much talk and not enough do. We see ourselves at the Arvai Institute as not only a kind of think tank, but we're a do tank. So those are just a few examples. And I specifically chose, we're also doing a lot of amazing things on in the West Bank. We work in the Bedouin communities inside of Israel, in the Negev, which have very similar problems, lack of electricity, lack of drinking water, and trying to find ways to provide incremental solutions that can be scaled up and can be replicated in other places. We work in Jordan. We have a number of projects in Jordan as well, which in certain areas is also suffering from lack of water. We're working on a major project in the West Bank. In the West Bank, we have, there's a wastewater treatment plant near Ramallah, which is actually treating the water to the level that it could be used for agriculture, but then it gets dumped into a wadi and mixes with raw sewage and goes into the aquifer because there's nothing in that area to use it for. There's no agriculture in this particular area. There's been a plan on the books for about 15 years to pipe, to capture that good water, treated water, and pipe it down to the Jericho Valley where there are Palestinian farmers that are desperate for agriculture water. But it's been stuck for 15 years because the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli authorities weren't talking to each other. So we went to the Israeli army first, and we said to the civil administration that controls the West Bank, and we said, look, we want to help. And they said, great, come with us. So we went as a team, our Palestinian partners and ourselves. We went with the army. They took us on a tour of the West Bank, showed us the different possible routes, because this was the disagreement where this pipeline would go. Would it go into Area C, Area A, Area B? We'll get into that. But there was a disagreement about the route. Took us on the different possible routes and then handed us a map and said, here's a map with 4 different routes. You take this to the Palestinians because we're not talking to them, and you get them to agree on one of these routes. Go to the Palestinian Water Authority. We meet with the head of the wastewater division, and we show them the map. And we said, look, we want you to do a study, and you decide, you write a report and tell us what the Palestinian Water Authority wants, which one of these routes. Of course, we paid him to do it. He comes back after 2 weeks. He said, here's your report, right? Take my name off it, put your name on it, you paid for it. You bring it to the Israeli authorities because we're not talking to them. So we go back to the Israeli authorities, to the colonel that we're working with. We handed him the report. We said, here's our recommendation. He opens it up, looks at the map, sees that we chose route number 1. He said, oh, I see you've chosen route number 1. This is one of the routes that we've approved. Now we can talk to the Palestinians. A week later, invites the Palestinian Water Authority to his office to meet about this project. In walks the delegation from the Palestinian Water Authority. The head of the delegation is the guy that we had hired to write the report. He sees the report sitting on the desk. He walks over to it, picks it up, looks at it, and goes, "Oh, we can live with this." And now we are into the design phase of that project. This project was stuck for 15 years, and we're now moving ahead with design. And of course, we're not going to build this pipeline. International community will do. But what we've done is we've enabled both sides to come to an agreement on the route and now on the design. So this is the work that we do at the RFI Institute. This is the role that we think we can play, and perhaps the most important issue, I think, most important thing that I think we need to remember is that there are human beings on all sides of this border, and all those human beings really want is water, energy source, electricity, food security, public health, education, really the basic things that just everybody in the region wants. And we need to find a way to reach across borders. We need to, instead of building walls, to build bridges. That's what we do with the RFI. Thank you very much.
One second here.
I have a question for David. Last night you spoke about sand being stolen.
1 second. 1 second.
Reedy, can you hold for just a sec? We want to be able to hear you.
It's coming out of the computer. Should we go ahead, Andrew? Rini, can you try speaking?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
No, not yet. Is that off?
People can hear you out there, but we can't hear you in the room now. I think now we probably can.
Can you hear me?
Not yet. Just 1 second.
Okay. I did put the question in the chat.
Okay, so What's her name? Your name is Rini. Rini, hi Rini. Do you hear me? Rini, do you hear
Yes.
me? Okay.
Yes.
So, I'll repeat the question. So Rini asked, last night I mentioned that there's a problem with sand mining, illegal sand mining, and that and the question was, what is sand? It's actually become a very high valued resource for many different purposes. Certainly remember as a raw material, what's sand? Sand is basically silicon, right? And what do we use silicon for? Just about everything. So there is a lot of times sand is used for that, but in Israel, most of the sand that is being mined is used in building. It's the basic ingredient for concrete. It's basically the builders that are demanding sand, and there are of course legal places where sand can be mined, but that they may be far from the building site, or they may be expensive, and it's sometimes a lot easier and cheaper for the developers to simply send their trucks to places like Samar Sand Dunes, which is near my home, which is a beautiful nature reserve, which has these beautiful sand dunes. Those of you who are coming down to see the Arvai Institute will have a chance to see the sand dunes in our area. And for a number of years, there was some, first it was illegal, and then the government actually approved them taking out the sand. And of course, we citizens rose up in anger, and we put a stop to that. And now the area is protected as a nature reserve. Other questions?
There's another one in the chat. Any desalination ability in Gaza?
Okay, yeah, there is. The question was, is there any desalination opportunities in Gaza? There's definitely an opportunity there. They have a beach, and that's pretty much all you need is a beach in the ocean. But clearly it's going to take many, many years. It's not going to solve the problem. It took years for Israel to build its desalination plants. There is a plan to do so. I think it's funded by the international community. But there's always the question of whether or not you finally build it, and then desalination requires a phenomenal amount of energy. So you have to have an energy source to make this option even feasible. So really the first problem that needs to be solved, perhaps the most acute problem, is the issue of energy for Gaza.
Other questions that you may have, and even if you do it verbally, we could repeat it here so everyone can hear. We'll be able to hear from at least this terminal.
We think we also think the speaker might work now.
Oh, okay. Well, Audrey.
My question is, where does the money come from for these projects? And is the Israeli government and the Palestinian government, are they contributing anything towards this, or is it all private?
And David, you might have to repeat that. I'm not sure we picked it up.
Okay, so the question is, where did the funding come from for these projects, these initiatives? So first of all, whether or not the Israeli government or the Palestinian Authority contribute, no, they do not. The Palestinian Authority is basically bankrupt and has deep debts, and we're not their first priority. Let's put it that way. Second of all, the Israeli government doesn't necessarily, provide funding for this, and in fact, if they did, it might be difficult for our Palestinian partners then to work with us if we were getting funding from the Israeli government. So what we do is we raise money from private donors and foundations, mostly in the United States, sometimes in Europe as well, sometimes in Israel. From private money, we've managed to do that. What? Well, the bike ride, no, the bike ride, the funding for the bike from the bike ride goes specifically for support of the academic program, the scholarships. That's the main purpose of the money we raise on the bike ride. Yeah.
Is there a potential now that there's more diplomatic interaction between Israel and some Gulf states to do some fundraising there to get some support for?
We are definitely trying. It is. I hear an echo. It is.
I'm not sure.
No, I think
You're fine. I'm doing my best. Yeah.
Okay. It's echoing.
Go ahead. I'm going to leave you.
Yeah. So first of all, I would say that the whole issue of the Abraham Accords is very complicated and is sometimes problematic. It's problematic, first of all. Keep in mind that it's not like Israel was fighting a war with Bahrain or UAE or Morocco. You know, there's been quiet, peaceful relations with those countries for years. The Palestinians felt abandoned. They felt, like the rug was pulled out from under them when the Abraham Accords were signed, which was pretty much, I think, the intention of the previous Israeli government. And to a certain extent, it kind of, the PLO kind of deserve it in the sense that they sat on their hands and did nothing and waited for the world to save them. And the Arab world has gotten tired of that. So there's plenty of blame to go around, but it's unfortunate because it was a golden opportunity to make a difference. The UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, they all could have said, we'll sign this, agreement, but we want to see this or that happen in Gaza, in the West Bank with the Palestinians. They could have made them a part of the process, and they didn't bother. And that's a shame. And it also means that it's sensitive. Any kind of work that we do with the Gulf states has to be in coordination with our Palestinian partners, otherwise we'll lose them. And for us, they're a lot more important, our partners. So there is slowly, though, we're beginning to have these discussions with our connections in the Gulf states around the idea of them funding projects in Jordan or in the West Bank or in Gaza. So I think it hasn't happened yet, but I do think that is an opportunity as well.
So, David, you talk about building. How did you go and when did the Arava Institute begin? And how did you initially go about beginning to build trust, particularly with Palestinians?
So that's a really great question. Thank you. So the Arava Institute was founded in 1996 on Kibbutz Keturah, not by me. It was founded by my friends, Alon Tal and Miriam Sharton, who were members of the kibbutz at the time. And they basically, this was during the Oslo Halo times, and they, came up with this idea of creating an academic program, an educational program, which brought together Arabs and Jews. Kibbutz Keturah was founded in 1973, and it was founded as what we call a pluralist kibbutz. It was the first kibbutz. It was before Lotan, before Yahel, before Hanaton. It was the first non-religious kibbutz that had a kosher dining room and kept Shabbat and has an active synagogue. And the idea on Keturah was that this was in the 70s, that we didn't like what we saw in Israel as this separation between, you're either religious or you're secular, and there's nothing in between. And so that was our vision on Keturah, to create a community where different strains of Judaism could feel comfortable living together, working together, praying together. And we even had started programs, academic programs or educational programs, which kind of brought different points of view together. And so in some senses, this idea that, well, if we can do it between, Orthodox Jews and Reform Jews and secular Jews, then maybe we can do it between Jews and Palestinians or Jews and Arabs. And so it was kind of natural, I think, on the one hand. On the other hand, it's certainly not a given that any kibbutz would be comfortable bringing Palestinians from Gaza or the West Bank or Jordanians to live on the kibbutz, because our campus is, interwoven into kibbutz life. Our students live in dorms that are on the kibbutz, and it's open. They can go anywhere on the kibbutz. They eat in the dining room. We study. Our classroom is in the sort of community center of the kibbutz. So, this kind of situation, very unusual, but it was especially for the Palestinians and the Jordanians when they come to a Jewish settlement. Turah is clearly a Jewish settlement. It's not what they expect. It's very different. And Turah itself is kind of this sort of tolerant society, so it's a model. But it is true that when we started the Institute back in 1996, when Alon and Miriam started, we thought we could, bring a bunch of Jews and Arabs together, throw them in a room, teach them about the environment, because that's something that we can all agree on, and all the rest of that stuff they would talk about on their own in the campus, in the dining room, whatever. Doesn't work that way. We found out very quickly. Either students would sit there and sort of just smile at each other and not say what they really think, or it would come out, but not in a very productive way. And eventually, very, very soon, we realized that if we didn't initiate the conversation, talk about the elephant in the room, then it wasn't going to happen, or it was going to happen in a poor manner. And so early on, we created a program that today we call the Peace Building Leadership Seminar, which is a once a week, not for credit program where we talk about what they don't want to talk about, but it's required of all the students. And we talk about history, politics, religion, war, occupation, terrorism, all the things that bring out the emotions. This is the Middle East, so these sessions are not very quiet, and they often end with the students screaming and yelling at each other and stomping out the door. But what makes the Arvai Institute unique is the fact that we are located on Kibbutz Keturah, which is in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere. So they have no place to go after they've screamed and yelled at each other, except back to the campus where they're living together, sharing tea, sharing coffee, sharing computers, sharing space. And what the students will often tell us is, hey, we didn't come here for this. We came here to study the environment. And what we tell them is, look, you really can't learn how to live in peace with nature until you've learned how to live in peace with your neighbor. But at the end of the program, the students all tell us the same thing, which is that the Peace Building Leadership Seminar was the most important thing that they did. And this is where those strong bonds of trust are built. It's not as I said, it's not a weekend in Maine or a week in Spain. It's a 4 month, sometimes full year, because some of the students stay for the full year, sometimes multi-year, because some students remain connected to us, where people are really living together and having, and you scream and yell at someone about, who's right, who was here first, who was this, that's all fine and good. But the next day, you're together again, sitting in a classroom, working on projects together. What we learned is that first of all, relations need to be built long-term. They can't be one-off meetings, okay? They need to be, second of all, I would say, with all due respect to Zoom, you need to be in the room to build trust. You can have a Zoom meeting with somebody you trust, and get a lot of things done. But if you're meeting someone and you have not yet built that trust, you need to see that person in the room. You need to feel, and so that's why when the pandemic hit in 2020 and we had 60 students at the Arvai Institute, first of all, we told them, we're going to allow you to stay on the campus, 60 students. You can also go home because we're going to put all classes on Zoom. Of course, none of them wanted to go home. And they all felt perfectly safe on Kedura. And the kibbutz was very generous and said, yes, we can keep these students here. They're already here. They can stay. But in the fall of 2020, when we had to make a decision, are we reopening the Arava Institute? And at that point, fall 2020, Israel was really suffering from the pandemic. We had to decide, are we going to open up in person, bring people to the campus, or are we going to do the whole thing on Zoom? And we said no. We said either we do this in person or we don't do it at all because virtual doesn't work. So those were a lot of, and the most important thing I would say is listening and teaching people to listen. And that's really a lot of times all it takes is that when you're in conflict with someone and you disagree on everything that you could possibly imagine, but you show that you're willing to listen to the other, to hear what they have to say. This is especially important when there is a lack of symmetry between power dynamics, when you've got one side which has the power, which is the Israelis, and the other side is the Palestinians. That it's the Palestinians that most feel they need to be heard, and they can't hear anything until they feel like they've been heard. They can hear nothing. But once they've been heard, once they feel they've been heard, they're then at least ready to start possibly opening up to the other side. It's not easy. So these lessons that we learned in the Arava Institute's academic program, we also utilize in our collaboration with Palestinian and Jordanian researchers. And this is how we launched the Track 2 Environmental Forum. We said, let's take our experience working in academics, in research, in studies, and let's use it for real life situations. So I have a friend who is the former minister of water in the Palestinian Authority, Dr. Shaddad Attili, who's our partner in this Track 2. And at the first conference we had for Track 2, when we really didn't know quite what we were doing, we had, Palestinians, Israelis, Jordanians, and each one got up and made their speech, what they were talking, water, energy. So Shaddad gets up on stage in front of about 50, 60 people in the room, Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians. 1967 borders, Israeli occupation, it has to be end to the occupation. And all the Israelis are kind of sitting there kind of cringing, having a really hard time. And it was tough. It was tough to sit there and listen to him because he was really giving it to us, Israelis. He got off the stage and he comes over, he walks over to me and he grabs me around the shoulder. He says, David, listen, I want to talk to you about this project that we're going to do together. It was like two different people, but he needed to be heard. He needed to be able to say, as a proud Palestinian, to not be accused of being a normalizer, to be allowed to say what was in his chest and the Palestinian stand. It's oddly enough, just 2 weeks ago, a month ago or so, I was in Cyprus at a conference that is based on this Track 2 project. And again, we had Palestinians, Israelis, Jordanians, and we were talking about food, water, energy, and environment. And Shaddad was there, and he got up and did his thing, did his Palestinian thing. He was talking about water specifically, and he went through the whole litany of Palestinian complaints, which I think some of them are very legitimate, but he was, obviously presenting the Palestinian perspective. And there was a woman from the Israeli Water Authority was there, senior person. And instead of getting up and saying, presenting the Israeli side, she stopped and said, Shaddad, I want to try and understand your perspective. And boy, that just sort of broke the ice. I mean, that was it. That's all he had to hear. Because once he heard that, it was like, let's everybody get down out of our trees and let's talk tachlis. Let's talk, real, and the conversations were real. So I think these lessons are important. I think these lessons are what we've learned at the Arvai Institute by not being afraid to go there, by not being afraid to delve into some of the most difficult conversations we have. You know, on college campuses around the country, there's something called safe space. Safe space is where you don't talk about any, hot button issues. At the Arvai Institute, our definition of safe space is where you can talk about anything, right? In a way that enables the other to listen and to respond and to continue to work together afterwards. So this is a long-winded answer to your question.
So thank you. I'm going to take this. I love ending like this. This is, though, of course, the follow-up question is, what else can we do?
Come tonight.
That's what I wanted you to say. Is it still
Come tonight, come
possible?
tomorrow night.
I don't think we can.
But tomorrow
night. Come
Yeah.
tomorrow night.
6:30 here at the congregation.
Right.
We're very specifically, we'll talk about other things that we can do.
Absolutely.
Okay. It has been, again, a delight and an honor to have you with us this Shabbat. I know you're staying until Monday, also meeting at the Milwaukee Jewish Day School, right?
No, I don't think so. No,
No.
not that. No.
Not that, but we're glad you're here. We have a chance to meet with you again tomorrow. Cantor, do you want to add anything?
No, we're thrilled that you're here and that you're enlightening us all. And the great work that you're doing. So,
Thank you. Thank
All
you
of
very
you
much.
out there, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Thanks for you.